Have you ever felt like a passenger in your own body, watching helplessly as your mind spins out of control? It is a sensation that usually strikes in the quietest hours of the night or the most high-pressure moments of the day. A sudden tightening of the chest, a flush of heat in the face, or a spiraling descent into a darkness that feels entirely disproportionate to the events actually taking place around you. We like to believe that we are rational creatures, that we are the pilots of our own existence, navigating life with logic and reason. Yet, if we are truly honest with ourselves, we must admit that for the vast majority of our waking lives, we are not being driven by logic. We are being driven by how we feel. We make decisions based on fear. We sabotage relationships out of insecurity. We procrastinate out of anxiety. And we snap at loved ones out of a misplaced sense of irritation. The universal question that haunts the human experience is simply this: why are we, the most advanced species on the planet, so utterly at the mercy of our own internal weather systems? Why is it that a single negative comment from a stranger or a minor setback at work has the power to completely derail our happiness and hijack our productivity for days at a time? This is not merely a question of comfort. It is a question of freedom, for if you cannot control your emotional state, you are, by definition, a slave to your environment. Today, we are going to explore the profound work of Julia Hart and her seminal text, Master Your Emotions. But we are not simply going to summarize a list of tips. We are going to retrace the harrowing and transformative journey that led her to uncover the mechanics of the human heart. We are going to treat this narrative as an excavation, digging through the layers of psychology, biology, and philosophy to understand the machinery of your mind, moving from a state of chaotic reaction to a place of deliberate creation. To understand the magnitude of the solution, we must first fully immerse ourselves in the gravity of the problem. And for Julia Hart, the problem was not academic. It was existential. Before she became a guide for others, Hart was a woman living a life that looked, from the outside, like a picture of success. Yet on the inside, it was a crumbling fortress built on a foundation of sand. Picture a high-functioning individual who has mastered the external world, the career, the schedules, the social obligations, but who is completely illiterate in the language of her own internal world. This was Hart's reality. She describes a period in her life where her emotions were not merely fluctuations in mood, but tidal waves that threatened to drown her daily existence. She lived in a state of chronic reactivity. If the traffic was bad, her morning was ruined. If a colleague sent a curt email, she would spend 4 hours crafting imaginary arguments in her head. If she felt a twinge of loneliness, it would spiral into a catastrophic narrative about being unlovable and destined for isolation. This is a state that many of us inhabit without even realizing it, a state where our emotional baseline is entirely dependent on external validation and circumstances. The crisis point for Hart came not with a bang, but with a terrifying realization of powerlessness. She found herself in a situation where the sheer weight of her unmanaged emotions, anger, resentment, fear, began to manifest physically, affecting her health, eroding her closest relationships, and stalling her professional growth. She realized that she was living life on a roller coaster where she had no access to the brakes. The pain of staying the same finally outweighed the pain of change. She looked at the trajectory of her life and saw that no amount of external success could ever compensate for the internal chaos she was enduring. It was this desperate, suffocating realization that launched her quest. She didn't just want to feel better occasionally. She wanted to understand the root code of human emotion. She became obsessed with a singular mission: to dismantle the emotional engine, see how the gears turned, and figure out how to take the wheel back from the autopilot. As Hart delved into the research, combing through neuroscience, evolutionary psychology, and behavioral studies, she encountered her first major breakthrough, a revelation that fundamentally shifts how we perceive our suffering. The first principle she uncovered was that our emotions are not designed to make us happy. They are designed to keep us alive. This seems like a simple statement, but its implications are earth-shattering. Hart realized that for millions of years, the human brain evolved in an environment of immediate physical danger. The rustle in the bushes wasn't a stressful email, it was a predator. In that context, anxiety, fear, and aggression were useful tools. They were survival mechanisms that sharpened focus and prepared the body for fight or flight. However, Hart discovered that the modern brain is essentially running outdated software in a new digital environment. We still have the same biological trigger systems, but the tigers are now social rejection, financial uncertainty, or public speaking. The brain, in its misguided attempt to protect us, treats these abstract threats with the same biochemical severity as a life or death encounter. This was the first key to the puzzle. The realization that our negative emotions are not a sign that we are broken, but a sign that we are functioning exactly as evolution intended, albeit in a mismatched context. Hart understood that the brain has a negativity bias. It is Velcro for bad experiences and Teflon for good ones, because remembering the berry that made you sick is more important for survival than remembering the beautiful sunset. This insight liberated Hart from the cycle of guilt. She realized she wasn't a negative person. She was simply a human being with a survival-focused brain that needed retraining. She began to view her emotions not as absolute truths about reality, but as biological suggestions. When she felt fear, instead of saying, "I am afraid," which identifies itself with the emotion, she learned to say, "I am experiencing a sensation of fear." This linguistic shift was the beginning of what she calls disidentification. She started to see her emotions as passing weather patterns, clouds moving across the sky of her consciousness. You are not the cloud. You are the sky. This separation created a gap, a tiny pause between the stimulus and the response, and it was in this gap that Hart found the first glimmer of true freedom. However, merely observing emotions, while helpful, was not a complete cure, and this led Hart into the deeper, more complicated waters of her second major discovery. As she practiced this detachment, she noticed a persistent problem. Even when she identified the emotion as a biological suggestion, certain feelings would persist and grow stronger, creating a feedback loop of misery. Why did some anger dissipate in minutes, while other resentments lasted for years? This question led her to the second principle, which centers on the interpretation gap. Hart realized that events themselves are neutral. A rainy day is just water falling from the sky. It is neither good nor bad until a human mind interacts with it. To a farmer during a drought, the rain is a blessing. To a bride on her wedding day, it is a disaster. The event is identical. The emotional reaction is opposite. Hart discovered that between the event and the emotion lies a hidden step, the story we tell ourselves about what the event means. She found that her suffering wasn't coming from reality, but from her interpretation of reality. For example, she analyzed a moment in her past where she was rejected for a promotion. At the time, the story she told herself was, "I am not good enough, and I will never succeed." This story generated profound depression. But looking back with her new framework, she saw that she could have interpreted the same event as, "This role wasn't the right fit, and this is an opportunity to find a path better suited to my strengths." If she had believed the second story, the emotional outcome would have been hope or relief, not despair. This was the complication and the solution wrapped in one. We cannot always control the events that happen to us, but we have absolute dictatorship over the meaning we assign to them. Hart realized that emotions are the exhaust fumes of our thoughts. If you pour toxic thoughts into the engine of your mind, you will inevitably produce the smog of negative emotion. She began to audit her internal monologue with the scrutiny of a forensic accountant. She caught herself catastrophizing, generalizing, and filtering out the positive. She realized that by changing the narrative, by consciously rewriting the story of her life in real time, she could alter the chemical signature of her body. This wasn't about delusional positive thinking or pretending everything was perfect. It was about choosing the most empowering interpretation that was still grounded in facts. It was the difference between seeing a challenge as a threat or seeing it as a puzzle to be solved. This journey of discovery, from understanding the biological survival mechanism to mastering the interpretive storytelling of the mind, culminated in a grand synthesis, a unifying theory that brought everything together into a cohesive lifestyle of emotional mastery. Hart realized that trying to fight an emotion once it has already fully bloomed is like trying to stop a speeding train by standing on the tracks. It is exhausting and often futile. The true secret, the aha moment that defines the climax of her work, is the concept of emotional architecture. She understood that instead of reacting to emotions, she needed to design an environment, both internal and external, that naturally produced the emotions she wanted to feel. This is a shift from defense to offense. Hart developed the concept that our emotional state is largely a product of our physical state, our focus, and our language. She discovered that you cannot have a depressed mind and a vibrant, energetic body. She began to use her physiology to hack her psychology, changing her posture, her breathing, and her movement patterns to signal safety and confidence to her brain before she actually felt it. Furthermore, she realized that what you focus on expands. If you focus on what you lack, you produce suffering. If you focus on what you have, you produce gratitude. But the deepest part of this synthesis was a realization that emotional mastery is ultimately a question of identity. You have to stop identifying as a victim of your feelings and start identifying as the architect of your experience. Hart's grand idea is that happiness is not a destination you reach. It is a skill you practice, much like playing piano or learning a language. It requires the daily maintenance of emotional hygiene. Just as we shower daily to clean our bodies, we must engage in daily practices, journaling, reframing, visualization, to clean the grime of negativity from our minds. She synthesized her journey into a model where the goal isn't to never feel negative emotions, because sadness and anger are part of the human tapestry, but to reduce the refractory period, the time it takes to recover. The master is not the one who never falls. The master is the one who gets up the fastest. This unified theory suggests that by managing our inputs, curating our environment, and consciously directing our focus, we can raise our emotional baseline so that when the storms of life do come, we have a sturdy vessel that can weather the waves rather than a raft that capsizes at the first gust of wind. So, what does this mean for you? Sitting there right now, perhaps feeling the weight of your own unresolved anxieties or frustrations. It means that the blueprint for your liberation is already in your hands. Julia Hart's journey from a reactive, overwhelmed individual to a master of her own psychology offers us a clear, actionable path. The blueprint begins with awareness. You must start watching your emotions as if you were a scientist observing a specimen, stripping away the judgment and the identification. It moves to interpretation. You must become the editor of your own life story, ruthlessly rewriting the narratives that disempower you and choosing perspectives that serve your growth. And finally, it creates a lifestyle of proactive design, using your body, your focus, and your habits to build a fortress of resilience. But let us be clear, understanding this intellectually is not enough. Information without execution is merely entertainment. The world is full of people who know what to do, but do not do it. The emotional call to action here is a demand for you to step into the arena of your own life. You are the only thinker in your mind. You're the only one who can grab the steering wheel. Do not wait for the world to become a calmer place. The world will always be chaotic. Peace is not the absence of chaos. It is the presence of a disciplined mind within the chaos. I invite you to make a commitment today, not to me, but to the future version of yourself who is waiting for you to take charge. If you are ready to stop being a passenger and start being the pilot, if you are ready to turn your emotions from your greatest master into your greatest servant, then join this community of growth. Subscribe to this channel, not just to watch another video, but as a declaration that you are dedicated to the ceaseless work of self-mastery. Control your feelings before they control you, because the quality of your emotions determines the quality of your life, and your life is far too valuable to be left to chance.